Well, guys, I think we're about to the point where we can start the webinar. And right now I have everyone unmuted. And so if you've got any background noise or anything like that, if you're listening in, I'd like for this to be interactive. Hopefully y'all are dialed in over the phone, or maybe you have a headset on. I'd like for, if you have any kind of questions whatsoever, to feel free to ask me. And we'll go ahead and get started. If you're on the call and you want to introduce yourself, you can go ahead and do that right now. And if you'd rather not, that's fine too. Anybody out there want to say hey? All right. Well, we'll move on from here. My name's Brandon Lewis. What we'll be talking about tonight is how candidates can raise more money for the offices that they're seeking. It's one of the probably least understood portions of campaigning, and something that's usually one of the core reasons if someone doesn't win, if a campaign doesn't win on election night, the reason that they don't. And I'll start with introductions. I'm founder of mycampaigntreasure.com. It's a website that hosts tools for state and local office seekers, software, documents, blogs, forums, and I'm also the author of How to Raise Money for Political Office, which has a comprehensive system for raising money from start to finish, and you can get it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, iTunes, most online booksellers. And most of this presentation kind of follows the principles that are in that book. If you're a grassroots candidate and you're running for office, often people have the mistaken impression that getting out there and going door to door and making a lot of phone calls and distributing literature is the only thing that you need to do to win on election night. And we have all seen candidates who are much more qualified lose simply because they were underfunded, because they didn't have the money to do that last-minute radio buy or local TV buy, or to send out that last mail piece, or to get literature out, signs out. And it's a frustrating place. And what I always encourage folks to consider is that when you're running for office, don't think of it as an either-or prospect, that you can only raise money and run like a big campaign, or that you can only target folks in a grassroots way. You can actually do both. We just had one other person join the webinar. Shannon, this is Brandon Lewis. Thanks for joining. If you'd like to listen in and give feedback and ask questions, feel free to do that. But there's a lot of background noise, so you may want to tune down your background or mute yourself if you're just listening. Continuing on, fundraising is kind of like the water that makes your grassroots grow. So you can use that to supplement what you're doing in your campaign and to enhance it. And that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. When people run just a strictly grassroots campaign, sometimes they're still amazed at the amount of money that it costs to do everything as effectively as you need to. And what I mean by that is, even if you are running in a very small, say a city council race, or something where you've only got a handful of people that are in your district, and you've only got to knock on 500, 600 doors, you still have to put gas in the minivan. You still have to pay for at least a respectable showing of yard signs. You still have to put up a website to be legitimized, and social media advertising if you're going to do it. It costs money. So even a shoestring budget is a budget. And so if you can enhance or beef up what you're doing with some good fundraising, that's a good thing. If you're running a larger race, say for example a county-wide race, or a state senate or state house race, you're going to have to engage in mass marketing if you're going to really make a difference. and things such as direct mail, especially if you do it in a repetitive fashion where you tell folks about who you are, pick 3 issues, and run maybe a contrast piece at the end if it's desirable, requires money. Direct mail is a good tool, but it is expensive. Signage, websites, printed collateral. If you're running in a county-wide race, radio and TV is usually something else that you have to do to really be competitive, and that can be very expensive. All things being equal, what I have seen over in my experience is that if there are candidates that are similar to one another, those candidates will be essentially, if one fellow has a good message and the other fellow has a good message, and if candidate A raises $200,000 and candidate B raises $100,000 and they do everything else equal, the fellow that's raised $200,000 is likely going to win just because he can get his message out. If he's got a less positive message, if you raise enough money, sometimes you can still overcome that discrepancy. And so what you want to do is make sure that you can at least be competitive from a fundraising standpoint. And we've had some additional folks join us, and if you have a question and if you've got a headset on, feel free to just simply go ahead and ask it. We've got luckily, we don't have a whole lot of people on this conference call, so we're able to interact. If you'd like to, just do so orally. So it's important that you be able to communicate your message. Another thing that's really, I guess, in my opinion, awesome about fundraising, and which some people probably think that it's not very awesome, is that cash on hand, unlike everything else in a campaign, is indisputable. It can't be argued. You can say that candidate A is a better candidate, that candidate A has I guess a better message or a better ground game where people are really engaging, but you don't know that until Election Day. You have no way to know that. But when you look at someone's financial disclosures and you discover that that individual has more cash on hand than another person, you know for sure that this is measurable. This person is to be taken seriously. This person has done a good job. The second thing it does is it legitimizes your campaign. If there are 4 or 5 people in a field running for office, and all of a sudden you look down and candidate A has $30,000 in the bank, candidate B has $500 or $5,000 in the bank, people are going to gravitate to the candidate that looks more legitimate. Additionally, it's publicly known. It's out there in black and white on the internet, in the newspaper, what you've done, whereas polling typically isn't published. Your strategy, there's no comprehensive survey or scientific research going to be conducted on that, and it's very soft. But fundraising is solid. Another thing it does is it deters competitors. If you get into a race early, and if you start raising money early, way before the deadline, and if you build up a large cash reserve, people will look at that race and go, I'm not certain that I can match this individual in the fundraising arena. I don't know if I've got the time or the resources. I may just not run. And so sometimes that happens, and that's a good thing. The last thing it does is it builds momentum. And momentum in a campaign is very important because success begets success. And people will give to you if you have raised money. Whereas often if they look at you in your second and third quarter filings and you haven't raised any, but the competitor has, they're more inclined to give to them. Again, all things being equal, if your values do not match up with what people want to see, then you may be unelectable no matter how much you raise. But typically, if you're a good bona fide candidate and you've raised more money, you stand a better chance of winning. Now we're going to talk about what you need to do before you ever start raising money. Some of you out there may be in the middle of a campaign. Some of you may be contemplating a campaign. But what we're going to do now is talk about the first thing you have to do. And there are 6 questions that you must clearly answer before folks will give you money. And as a fundraising consultant, and I guess somebody who's written a book and developed software, I've never really wanted to be on the messaging side, but because fundraisers are typically hired at the beginning of the process, you usually end up wearing multiple hats. Nobody else is there. There's no money in the bank, so they can't hire anybody yet, so you have to help them develop their message. And there are 6 questions that you have to answer. The first one is, who are you? And I know this sounds elementary, but think about every civic organization you've ever been involved in. When someone stands up to give a speech or to talk, the first thing they do is usually get introduced by someone. And the reason is people have an inherent desire to understand who is speaking to them, what your background is, what you've done with your life. And if you don't answer that question, it makes it difficult for them to hear anything else with your message. So make sure that you tell them who you are, and that means where you grew up, what your professional background is, what your values are, just about you and your personal narrative, what makes you qualified as a candidate, the story. You know, we all think about people like Abraham Lincoln. We all know bits and pieces of his personal narrative. Grew up in a log cabin in rough circumstances, was honest, etc. You've got a personal narrative as well. The second question that people have to have answered is, why are you running? Often candidates will drop the ball here, and they will say something like, well, you know, it's just a good time to run. I believe old so-and-so, he can be beat, and the district's been redrawn, and I've counted the votes, and I think I can make it happen. That's not what donors and that's not what voters typically want to know. They want to know from their perspective, what are you doing, and why are you running, and how will my business, my life be improved through your being elected. That's what people want to know. And again, we've got a small enough group on here that I've kept the lines unmuted, but if you've got a lot of background noise, it's real distracting for me. So if you'd like to, just mute your phone, or I'll just mute everybody on the call and then unmute folks at questions. So I'm going to try to continue, but it's hard. We've got 2 or 3 folks that have folks talking in the background. It's hard to present. Guys, I hope y'all don't mind, but I'm going to go ahead and mute everybody on the line, and then I'll bring you back up for questions. So make sure that you answer in a way that's not self-centered, and in a way that lets people understand that you care about what they value and how you can help them. It's very important. What do you believe? This could probably be better understood as your platform. What are the issues that you promote? Is it fiscal conservancy? Is it pro-growth? Are you, where are you on the Second Amendment? Where are you on right to life? All these issues. People need to know what you believe and why you believe it. And this is one that people often gloss over, and it's what makes you different from your competition. If you're running for office, there's only 4 things that can happen as far as your messaging goes. You tell people about yourself, you tell people about your competition tells folks about themselves, and your competition says things about you. If you fail to draw a distinction between you and your competition, you're essentially limiting yourself to 50% of the messaging. So you have to tell people why you're different, and tell donors why they should give to you versus the other guy. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to get into personal degrading attacks. This doesn't mean that you have to drag people's family into things, but it does mean that if they have voted wrong, if they have supported the wrong issues, if they are inexperienced or too experienced, or whatever you think makes you a better candidate than them, that you definitely let the donor know what it is that separates you from them. Can you win this election? When you're going to, particularly unlike with voters who really don't have a whole lot at stake personally by voting for you, although they may have a lot at stake depending on the outcome of the election, typically they spend a few minutes, they drive down to the polls to vote, and in addition to voting for other people, they're going to be voting for you or a campaign, and those people will check a little box anonymously and walk out. When you give, there's a lot bigger risk for a donor. It's publicly known that they support you. They have given you after-tax income. They've made a significant investment. So they want to know if you can win the election. And you can let them know that you can win the election through a number of ways. One is, have you been endorsed by people? What are your spheres of influence? Who can you bring to the table from a voter base? It could be professional folks. It could be people in your neighborhood, people at your church. They want to know, what's the makeup of the district look like? Where are your votes going to come from? What does your campaign team look like? What's your strategy? How do you plan to win? What's your message? So all the tactics, now that they've discovered who you are, they like you, they like your platform, they know how you're different from the competition, now they just want to know, can you win? And then lastly, people have this on their mind. How can I get involved? And this is where sometimes people drop the ball. And people will fail to ask for money, fail to ask people to volunteer, fail to ask for a specific donation of $1,000 and then just be quiet. So make sure that you don't let people off. Don't let people off the hook without letting them know that how they can get involved, particularly as it pertains to fundraising, is by giving you a financial contribution. We're going to talk now about figuring out how to determine your fundraising goals. And I'm going to go ahead and unmute folks again here to see. Just a lot of times people have questions during this segment. If your line is noisy, I may mute it again. Mr. Drummond, you have your hand up from what I can see. Can you talk into the conference here? Kevin?
I didn't realize I had my hand up.
Okay, there's just a, don't worry about it, man. There's just like a little thing here that shows up if people have a question. So your hand has been raised for 11 minutes according to the software, but at any rate, we'll just not worry about it. To determine your fundraising goals, say again?
I do want to make a comment, though.
Go ahead, sir.
It's very good information that you're giving, and I think I'm, just to give you a real quick breakdown of me, I'm a candidate and a supervisor of elections run here in Henry County, Florida, which is on the southwest side of the state of Florida, and I'm running unopposed on my party, Republican Party, and you make some really good points on a lot of people coming up and asking me how I can help. And rather than me send them to one of my directors to take information, I maybe should push more of the financial backing. So that's some kind of notes that I'm making, which is really good.
Yeah, well, one thing, Mr. Drummond, and then we'll move on to this slide. But anytime y'all have a question out there, feel free to interject and speak up because there's a lot of people on the line. Sometimes it's hard to hear. I always recommend that candidates have a small card that they keep in their pocket, typically with an envelope with it, and when people ask how I can help, you say, would you be willing to make a contribution? If you know enough about the person and know about what they might be able to give, say, would you and your wife consider maxing out for $2,500 each? I've got an envelope here. Do you have your checkbook handy? In the South, Florida is part South and part not South, but sometimes people think that's kind of offensive maybe, but you've got to ask, and so just ask them right there on the spot. Give them the envelope, and if they can't do it on the spot, then maybe they'll help you out later and mail it in. And keep a note that person said they'd help, and follow up and treat it as a pledge. Specifically, if they give you a certain amount that they'll give you. Talking about your.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I said no. That's a really good idea. I wrote that down for an envelope. I appreciate it.
No problem. And just chime in anytime. To determine your fundraising goals, what you have to do is start at election day and work your way back. Sometimes people have this weird notion of how much they should raise for an office because there's people tend to circulate in a group of politicos often, and some gray-haired sage will say, well, you got to raise $100,000 to win this race. Well, you got to raise $10,000, but those are just numbers they grab out of thin air. What you have to do is figure out what your target universe of voters are, how many people that you need, how many votes you need, calculate how many times and through what mediums you will need to contact them to communicate your message adequately. Say you got 1,000, 1,500, 20,000 people that you're trying to target. You're going to say, well, what I'd really like to do is mail, of that 20,000, 10,000 for the people I'm targeting. I want to mail them 5 times. I want them to hear, on average, 13 radio ads. I want to knock on their door. I want to knock on their door twice. I want them to get 4 phone calls, and I want them to see 25 TV ads. Well, to do that, you have to start from Election Day, work your way back when you're going to have to expend that, and then you will see when you have to raise the money to match it. But don't pull your numbers out of thin air. Don't just run a best case scenario campaign where you'll just spend what you have. Really, before you run, sit down and figure out exactly what your goals are. Let your goals drive your fundraising, not your fundraising drive your goals. And sometimes that will really open your eyes to what's going to be required to win on election night. Like I said, start on Election Day and work your way backwards. And in addition to figuring out your lump sum of what you have to raise in total, make sure that you also figure out what you have to, when that money has to be raised. It's not enough just to figure out, hey, I've got to raise $10,000. You've got to figure out, when do I need the first part, and when do I need, when am I going to be making my media buys, when am I going to be purchasing my signs, putting up my website, and things like that. And I've got a few questions up here, and if it's okay with y'all, once I see the questions, I'll probably just call on you instead of trying to read it, because I'm a man, and I can only do one thing at a time well, and my wife sometimes disagrees with that. So, Mr. Drummond, you had a question. Okay. Just chime in later if you'd like. But we'll start on election. Okay. Go ahead, sir.
Is there a certain amount of money you should spend on a resident or a registered voter? About approximately how much? Is there like a magic number or a number out there?
No, there really isn't, because, and you watch different national elections, and they're not really good examples for state and local, but, you take the presidential primary that recently took place. Some people spent $10 per voter in a state. In some states, they probably spent 50 cents. In some states, they may spend $5. It's really not about a certain dollar amount. What it's more about is figuring out how many times you're going to communicate with that donor to get your message across, and then backing into it. Because again, if you assigned a certain dollar amount per donor, you would be letting your fundraising drive your campaign, and not your campaign drive your fundraising. Nancy Bostic, I'm going to unmute you. You just jumped on the call. If you have any background noise, turn it down, but I want you to be able to participate. I'm going to move on to the next slide here, because I know I want folks to be able to get back to their families. Your campaign budget does not exist in a vacuum, but rather must be adjusted to account for supplementary and complementary campaigns. Sometimes people think that once they've set their goals, say it's $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 they have to raise, that's all it is, and it doesn't change. It's just like business. You have supplements, you have complements, you have substitutes. If you're in an environment where tons of people are running and there are tons of political ads on the air, you're going to have to raise more money in order to get your message through. So that means you have to raise more. If you've raised $100,000 and your opponent has raised $200,000, your goal can no longer be $100,000. It needs to be $300,000, $400,000. So no, and also one other thing is, if you've got lots of people running in an area, the earlier you can start, the better, because other folks will be going after those Tier 1 donors, and you'll be last in line, and that can also affect your fundraising. So make sure that you get started early, and remember that your fundraising budget does not exist in a vacuum. It has to do with your competition and your general political environment. To get started, develop your campaign narrative and create a candidate profile sheet and format a contribution form. We'll take a look at some examples on the website where you can download free documents when we get toward the middle of toward the end really of this webinar, and I'll show you where you can download these. But a campaign narrative is nothing more than a one-page, one sheet of paper, especially when you first start. Keep it low-tech, keep it simple, or a PDF that says answers those 6 questions on your personal narrative in an easy way, because if you ask people for money or you ask people to ask other people for money, they're always going to say, hey, what about this so-and-so? What's he do? What's his story? Why should I give? You need to have something succinct and simple so that they can do that, and that's a candidate profile sheet houses your campaign narrative. And then a contribution form is just a one-page document that says, yes, I'll contribute to so-and-so. It usually has some dollar amounts as suggestions. You collect all the information required by your state, or if you're running for federal office, sometimes even some counties and some municipalities have specific fundraising. And again, if you're out there and you're listening, everybody is unmuted, so if you've got noise in your environment, I don't want to have to mute everybody again. If you're cleaning your house, if the phone's rubbing up against your face, it's going to come in on my mic, and it's hard to do. So if you want to, just mute your phone. I'm going to move on to the next slide here, but make sure those are the fundamental tools that you have to have. Make sure that you have those tools for you. Next, map out all of your personal spheres of influence and potential influence, and identify folks that may be inclined to give. And assign a donation amount for solicitation. So often people leave the low-hanging fruit there, and they let it just rot on the vine, and it's very disappointing to me to watch candidates do that. I had a gentleman that I sat down with this week. I'm actually running a congressional campaign right now, and he came to me. He was running for state senate, and after we met, and he's real far into the process, he had not even really reached out to his friends, his family, folks he went to church with, people he worked for. We came up with about 5 or 6 groups of folks that he had tight connections with, and because he just hated fundraising, he hadn't done anything, and found out that he had spent no time really trying to fundraise, no time cultivating people. And I said, you don't need a consultation. You just need discipline, personal discipline. And he came to that conclusion, and I touched base with him today, and he's doing better. And so what you want to do is map out folks that you went to school with, college, undergraduate, graduate, high school, kids that go to your, or parents that go to your kids' school, where your kids go to school together, church, civic groups, professional associations, vendors if you own a company, fellow employees if you work for a company, management in that company you work for. Think of all the folks that know you and like you and that would be easy to approach, and those need to be the people that you approach first. Put their first name and last name in an Excel spreadsheet, and then once you've done that, go ahead and ask them for a specific amount. In the next column, put $200, $500, $5,000, whatever the amount may be, to make sure that you don't just ask somebody for a donation that could give you $5,000, they give you $50, and you walk away not really in the best position that you need to be in to win. Be ambitious. If you know somebody can give you $500, ask for $1,000. If you think they can give you $25, ask for $50. What you don't want to do is to leave large sums of money on the table. It's just not a good idea. And so I've watched people sit down in offices of folks that could give them $10,000 and then raise them $100,000, and they ask for $1,000, walk out of the meeting, and never see them again. And they never get that opportunity again. You may not ever get a second opportunity where people are in the right frame of mind and when they're receptive. So make sure that you take advantage of the opportunities that come your way. typical spheres of influence, work, church, family, and friends, particularly family and friends, should be the first people that you go to. These are the kind of organizations that folks belong to, church and work, that really basically because you spend a lot of time with people. Over time they get to know you, and often you've done things for them. So from a completely interested standpoint, the whole notion of reciprocation comes into play. You've helped them, and now you're doing something noble, and they want to help you. Examples of target donors: maybe you've got Jim Watson, who's your boss, and he'll give you $2,000. The lady that goes to church, plays the organ, she'll give you $250, and you got a friend, and you're going to hit him up for $1,000. And once you get, you look at these and you average them out, that's about $2,250, and you divide that by 3. That means that your average donor should probably give you somewhere around $600. So if you get 40, 50, 60 people on a list at $600, then that's $36,000. I think that's $36,000. My math isn't the strongest sometimes. And say only half of those people follow through. Well, you found $12,500 just in that handful of people that you know. And then you can move on to talking to other people. The second group of people that you want to go after are historically active donors. And this information is public. You can pull people up by zip code and FEC reports for federal. Sometimes those folks get involved at a state and local level. Sometimes they don't. You can call people, or you can go into the election records for your state. Sometimes they're online, sometimes they're not. So those are places that you can get information from. And what you want to do, and this is a very laborious task, but it will pay off in spades if you'll do it. If you'll enter all those people into an Excel spreadsheet and then list them by aggregate of what they've given. If you find somebody's given 10 times and it's an average of $1,500, that person in the last 7 or 8 years, or whatever term that you put on them, has given, tens of thousands of dollars to folks. And once you aggregated how much they've given, then just sort it in descending order, and you'll see that the top 15, 20 donors are really important and can be very important to your campaign. So get to know those people early, because everyone knows them. Everyone knows them by name often, but then there are some folks that may surprise you at how much they give. They give quietly, that aren't involved. So reach out to those folks. And if you don't get anything else out of this webinar, you need to research historically active, or when you talk to those folks that are historically active donors, before you get off the phone with them, you will ask them a very easy question: who do you know who? And that's where you go, Jim, thank you so much for pledging $2,500 to my campaign. I really appreciate it. Who do you know who would be interested in helping me, or who should I be contacting? And just be quiet and let them give you names. Sometimes people may say, well, let me get back to you on that, and you need to call them back. Sometimes folks will say, well, here's 5 names. You need to talk to so-and-so, Earl, Susie. You need to talk to these people. And then you say, well, do you have phone numbers for those people? Do you have an email address so I can follow up? Once you talk to those people, then organically your list, if you talk to 10 people and on average they give you 3 names, then you should be able to generate 30 names from 10 people. And the reason that's so powerful is those folks have filtered, based on their experience and expertise, folks that would be good for you. And that's a very powerful mechanism. But sometimes candidates, there's so much to do if you're going to do it perfect on the phone, that they get off the phone and they forget to ask that. And when you forget to ask that, you really do leave a lot on the table. And so always ask, every time you get a donation from someone, who else should I be approaching? Who do I need to engage? And you can build your list very quickly with quality donors in an organic way doing that. Donors give because of, and this is kind of why the Donors Give page, donors give because of personal relationships with the candidate. I've often given to candidates who I knew could not win, probably would be very unlikely to win, just because I knew them, because they had helped me, because I thought a lot of them personally. the personal relationship comes into play. Every single campaign will develop a very unique subset of donors who will never give again. And those people are folks you need to reach out to. They give because of shared ideology. You're very conservative. They're very conservative. You believe in XYZ specific issue. They're supportive of that. There's all kinds of reasons that people give. Peer pressure is another reason people give. Sometimes there's just a network of folks and they lean on each other constantly for money, for charitable organizations, for their kids' little league. And when it's their turn comes back around and, you know, Bob gave you $12,000 on the church capital project, and now you've got a friend that's running for office, and you ask him, hey, have you got $5,000 that you could put towards the mayoral race? Opposition to your opponent. Sometimes people may not like you very much, but they may hate the other guy, and that's not the best reason to give, and those don't make for the best donors, especially if all they do is dislike the other person and you win. They won't be repeat donors. But that's a reason folks give. And lastly, some people give because it's just their hobby. It's what they do. They're politically involved and active. It's their social sphere of influence. They get together and talk about politics. They've given forever. They like the attention of being contacted every time somebody runs, and they're just serial and repetitive givers, and they give all the time. But mainly, the biggest reason people give is because they were asked. The biggest reason people give is because they were asked. And a perfect example is this. Everyone, you know, around Christmas time walks in and out of retail establishments, and there is a person standing there from the Salvation Army oftentimes, and they're ringing a bell. Were you going to drive to the Salvation Army and give that dollar that day? Were you going to mail in your 50 cents? Were you going to mail in your $5? Of course you weren't. But because they were not even asking, just ringing a bell, and because you understand what they mean, you walk over, you take your dollar, and you stick it down in there. Same thing if a Boy Scout comes to your door selling peanuts or popcorn or whatever they sell in your neck of the woods. You don't really need that popcorn, that expensive, high-priced popcorn. You could buy it, you know, just down the road for a lot less money. But because, you know, some shiny-faced boy who's often attached to a parent that you know walks up with this grubby little handout, you give him money for those peanuts. Reluctantly, begrudgingly, perhaps, but you give. And it's because he asked, not because you're going to voluntarily send in your donation to the Boy Scouts that year. So often people they'll never seek you out, hardly ever. Every once in a while you'll get a lucky, you know, maybe 0.02% of donors will seek you out. The rest you will have to seek out, and if you ask, you stand to be in a really good position. Spend the majority of your time focusing on those donors who can give and raise the most money. I know this should be intuitive, but often it's not. You start with the big donors first and work your way down. You know, start with the people that have the most capacity and work your way down. Now, there's also kind of a flip side to that. In addition to the people that have the most money, there are also the people that are the most likely to give to you with the least amount of effort. And those people are kind of equal, because sometimes large donors take a lot of wooing, and you have to court them over a long period of time. So making sure that you do that is very important, and to start early. Start early courting those people, but don't, you know, wear yourself out approaching people who just don't have the capacity to give. People that just don't spend your time going after $25 donors if you can go after $250 or $2,500 donors. So spend your time where your time can be used the most effectively. We're going to talk about fundraising methods right now: personal visits, personal phone calls, formal and informal events, and email solicitations, social media, etc. Personal visits. When you go visit with somebody, make sure that you have an end in mind. And it could be just to get to know them. If they're a Tier 1 donor and they're going to give lots of money, it could be that you want to ask them for money because you've warmed them up over time. But whatever, it could be because you're going to ask them to serve on a finance committee or a host committee for an event, or that you need them to introduce you to someone. But whatever your goal is, start out with that in mind, and don't forget that. Don't forget that. And going back to personal visits, spend 80% of your time listening. Ask open-ended questions about their business, about their life, where they think the nation is going or the county is going, what they see as problems, what they see as good things that need to be continued, what kind of candidate they're looking for. And about 20% of the meeting toward the end, tell them your personal narrative and then ask them to help you in some way. The more you listen, the better off you'll be, and it's very difficult to listen yourself into a fix. And one last thing about personal visits is you'll probably agree with that donor more than you'll disagree, and if you let them talk first, you can let the 80% of the things that will bond you be the conversational topics, and you can avoid the 20% of areas where you may disagree. Now, if they're principled disagreements and large issues for you, maybe they're not a good fit for you. If they're going to try to get you to vote or want you to vote in a way that's counter to your beliefs. But if you're largely on the same page, don't step on a landmine just because you didn't know any better, because you didn't listen enough. Phone calls. When you're making phone calls, don't count the yeses, count the nos. And say I'm going to get 25 no's before I get off the phone today. People often get hung up on how much money they raise that day, and that's not what you need to do. Just if you put in the time and the phone calls, money will come out on the other end. So count the no's and be excited when you get a bunch of no's, because inside those no's are the yeses. Get in a quiet, distraction-free place and have your follow-up documents at your disposal. If you've got a kid, a house full of dogs, if you're at work, probably not the best place to call. Set aside some time specifically, get in a quiet place, clear off a desk, and make your phone calls, and have your contribution form in an envelope there. And when somebody says, "Sure, Bob," or Pete, or Shannon, or Sharon, or Kevin, or Nancy, I'll give you $5,000, you need to immediately write down their pledge, sketch a note that says, "Thanks for pledging $5,000. You need to sketch a note and drop it in the mailbox so they can pay it like a bill." And then I would send them an email reminder at the same time. I'd hit them through the email and in the mailbox. You have a lot higher chance of redemption that way. Event fundraising. Set your dates way in advance. Don't try to rush fundraising events. The further back you can put them, the better. That doesn't mean that if you're in a tight spot that you don't try to compress the timeline. In my book, I spend a lot of time fleshing out best practices for fundraising events. I devote a lot of time to it because they're very important. I won't go through all the details, but you can find more information there. Build financial commitments on the host committee. If there's $1,000 a person, build your fundraising base before you ever mail the invitation. When you do events, there are really two events. The first event is mailing the invitation with a loaded host committee, and your second event is actually the event the day of. You should be able to raise 50 to 70% of your money before the event ever takes place. You should have commitments. And if you don't have a lot of commitments, then I wouldn't have the event. I'd just call people for money. So, if it's $1,000 a person, and you get 15 people on there, you've got $15,000. If no one but the host committee shows up, you're still in good shape. And try to get that money, if you can, in advance. Then that way, if they get on hard times or something doesn't go right or the event gets canceled, you don't have to worry about collecting at the event. That money has come to you in advance. That's something I would also recommend. And then once you do that, you've got to mail, you've got to call, email, call, and email. I mean, you've just got to wear people out. You have to remind your host to show up. You have to try to build attendance, and communication is the #1 way to do that. And don't be afraid to communicate too much, because I've rarely ever seen that happen, but I have seen people communicate far too little. Don't get hung up in fundraising events on the fun stuff. like logistics, food, decorations, music. I watch people, because they are trying so hard to avoid the fundraising, that they'll just spend all kinds of time planning a party. You know, if you want to plan a party, wait for your kid's birthday party, wait for your birthday, wait for an anniversary party. But for fundraising, make it about fundraising, and the event details can almost take care of themselves just a few days before the event. Keep it very simple. Keep it low expense. People don't expect a T-bone steak dinner. They just want a nice, friendly environment with something to drink, perhaps alcohol, depending on the section of town and or state that you're running in, and they just want to have a good time. We'll talk about direct mail and email here. I devote a significant amount of time to direct mail in the book. It's not something you can spend a whole lot of time in a webinar that covers everything on. So if you want more details on that, I give examples and enumerate everything in the book. But here's what I would do if you're not going to do anything else. Don't reinvent the wheel. I'd say pay $100 and steal in this slide. And what I mean is take $100 and take $20, send it to the national party of your choice, send it to your congressman, send one to your senator, send one to the President of the United States. Even if you don't like him, it will be worth the $20. And sometimes I send them to liberal organizations, even though I'm not, just to see what they are doing, because sometimes liberals do mail better than I do, but I only send them $20 a year, and that keeps me on the list. So if you'll send that to people, you'll start an email in a donation or two for $100 to $200. You can receive the best of the best. And all you have to do is, once you get a package that you really like, is to just basically copy it. The style and the tone may stay the same, but you're going to change the content. And there's no point, if they've paid people lots of money to write their letters, it's better for you to just copy them, because as a state and local candidate, sometimes that's the easiest and only thing to do. And the smaller your races are, the less effective direct mail and email are going to be for you. Keep it short, keep it to the point, and if you're sending out emails, make every 5th or 6th email or 7th email about raising money. The rest of them need to be topical updates, interesting facts, things that will help build a relationship with your email list. If the only time you use your email list is to ask for money, then your open rates will go down, and that's not what you want. You got to build a relationship. Website and social media marketing. I talk about this in the book. Provide dynamic content and build a relationship. If you can do that, if you can be the go-to place for your local race, for local issues where people can get information, then they'll come there and they'll get a warm and fuzzy feeling about your web page or your Facebook page or your Twitter account. And then on occasion, when it's appropriate, ask for money and be aggressive about it. But if you don't build the relationship, then you're going to be in a tough spot. Direct contact from the candidate is going to be your primary catalyst for generating dollars from donors. There is absolutely no substitute for personal contact. If senators and congressmen and the President of the United States has to get on the phone and jet set to events and call and meet with people, if you're running for state and local office, you've got to do it too. There's no way around it. And the smaller your race is, the more they are going to want to hear from you personally, and not in a letter and not in an email. And from a sequencing standpoint, you want to save your emails and you want to save your letters for when you have exhausted all of your personal contact and events, because what you don't want to do is send a letter to somebody that can give you $5,000 and they send you $50 in the mail and wash their hands of your race. That's not a position you want to be in. From a strategy standpoint, when you're raising money, instead of focusing on how much to raise each week, month, or quarter, commit to executing action steps that will lead to the production of revenue and plot funding sources on your calendar. Don't worry about, hey, I didn't raise $100 today. I had a goal of raising $100 or $1,000 or $10,000. Instead, commit to a certain number of inputs, and here's what that might look like. In May, you say, we're going to have 2 events. We're going to have 3 marathon group call days. That can be when you call in a bunch of friends to call on your behalf and to give you names to follow up with, and they come in and you buy them pizza and beer or whatever's appropriate for your area, and those folks make phone calls. You're going to visit 20 people. You're going to write 1 letter and send out 1 email. You probably wouldn't send out a letter in a state and local race every month, and probably not even an email. But this is just something to give you an idea. Daily goals, I'm going to make 20 goals. I'm going to do 1 personal visit each day. That could be lunch, breakfast, stopping in at somebody's office to say hey. And I'm going to add 5 donors to the database. Don't overlook the adding 5 donors to the database. Of all of this, that kind of looks like the least important part. But in all truthfulness, if you let your database get old and tired, you're going to be going back to the same folks over and over again. And while you certainly want to cultivate those people, and sometimes cultivation is better than prospecting, you need to infuse your database with people from time to time so that you have a really good list to pull from. And then weekly, say that you're going to have 1 group visit, and that could be, I'm going to call John over at the bank, and I'm going to ask him if he can get some 4 or 5 of his executives together and talk to them about my race in the hopes that maybe I can get some folks to be on a finance committee or a host committee. And then, 2 PAC packets. And PAC packets are, if you're going to take political action committee money, are just folders that have a letter from you, maybe some articles, something that tells your personal narrative, background, newspaper clippings, basically just to give to a PAC to ask them for money. And you'll want to send those off. And if you put the inputs in to the fundraising system, the outputs will follow, but you have to be methodical. You have to chart out what you're going to do every day. It's much like training for a marathon. If you tried to run a marathon and you never got out and ran the first mile, the day that you built up to the first mile, then the 3rd mile, then the 4th mile, then the 10th mile, then the 15th mile, then you would never be able to run a marathon. And fundraising is kind of the same way. If you don't slowly condition yourself and your campaign over time, and you just try to blow it all out at the end, there's not enough time to do it. You can have some success doing that and might, get all your low-hanging fruit raked in pretty easy, but the things that will require cultivation, you'll never be able to really maximize your potential. We're going to talk about common pitfalls here, and the first one is distraction. I watch candidates do this. There are a lot of things that are a lot more fun to do on a campaign than raise money. People want to talk about strategy. They want to talk about political gossip. They want to go to the Rotary Club meeting and hobnob. They want to go to the local conservative Tea Party or GOP or 912 meetings and kind of rub elbows with folks. That's all well and good, but you're kind of preaching to the choir. You're getting in what my preacher calls a holy huddle. All those people are converted already. You're not going to get any converts out of that group. You need to be on the phone in front of folks asking for money, and as you get your fundraising done, then do the fun things. It's kind of like the old saying, if every day you had to swallow a frog and that was the worst thing that you had to do, in the morning, get up, look that frog in the face, and swallow it, and be done with it, so the rest of your day can be good. If fundraising for you is swallowing the frog, then get out there and do it, and do it at the beginning of the process. And allocate specific amounts of time and resources exclusively for fundraising and make them sacrosanct. If you decide that every day at lunchtime or at 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock you're going to get on the phone and make fundraising calls, and you're going to start a year out, and those could be cultivation calls, not necessarily solicitation calls, then get on the phone and do that, and do it with a passion, and do it every day. And what you'll notice is you may hate the first 2 or 3 phone calls, but then you'll get to a point where you're like, this isn't so bad, and then you might actually find yourself enjoying yourself. Probably unlikely. Even as a fundraising consultant, it usually takes me 2 or 3 calls to get warmed up. There's a certain reluctance to making fundraising calls, and I don't care who you are. Excessive expense. People will spend their money on all kinds of foolish things, bracelets, pins, doodads, fancy software they never use, for all kinds of things, instead of keeping simple software, keeping things that that are functional and easy to use. What you need to do is save your money as much as you can for voter contact and for purchasing the things that facilitate voter contact. Keep your events simple and affordable, and make sure that the percentage of money raised is up and that your fundraising expenditures don't eclipse what you raise. Disorganization. Develop a system and dedicate a space to implementing that system. There are a lot of inputs in raising money for political office. A lot of things are going to come at you. You're going to have tons and tons of folks that give you cards. You're going to have databases that you're going to try to import into your software. You're going to have pledges that aren't redeemed. You're going to have people say they're going to attend an event and they're not. There's just tons of inputs. And so if you don't develop a specific protocol and a way of doing things, you can quickly end up in what I like to call Excel hell, and with a big pile of papers on your desk that are unprocessed and a bunch of jumbled spreadsheets, and that's no way to run a campaign. You need to gather the physical organizational tools and software, and that means file everything, everything in its place, and a place for everything, and have a process for everything. And if you need to get somebody to help you do data inputting, then that's fine, but make sure that you have a system for it even if you don't do it, and keep good notes. I'm going to show you a few things that can help you on my website. Most of these resources are free, and if it's something that you think can help you, and then we'll finish up this last little segment. It should take about 5 or 10 more minutes, and then we'll get back on the rest of the presentation. First thing I'm going to do is, I guess, take you to mycampaignTreasure.com, and there's lots of, I'm not a very good typer apparently, there's lots of resources on here that you can use that are free. The first thing I want to show you, and we talked about these documents earlier, down on the very bottom here, there are some example campaign files. Let's try that again. Example campaign files, and if you look here, there's a quarterly budget, a campaign reply example, all kinds of things here that you can use, letter examples, reception lineup forms, a couple of different pledge of supports, name tags, agendas, you name it, budgets, and then a detailed, enumerated letter and a reply device, all kinds of different things that you can use that are really good here. Let me minimize this screen. Also on here, you'll find a forum if you'd like to ask questions. If you post them, I'll answer them. There's a blog with some good articles here to read. Some of them are more for SEO, frankly, than good content, so you may find some things in there that aren't as helpful, but some things are very helpful. This is the book that I wrote on political fundraising, and you can buy it here. You can preview what's inside by clicking this link, read some of the reviews, see what it covers. Additionally, if you're more of an Amazon type person, you could hop over here. You can buy it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, iTunes, pretty much anywhere online books are sold. And the big thing, probably the most important thing that's here, is the fundraising software, and you can find out about the features and tours. There's all kind of little videos here to watch, plans and pricing, another video on that, and then some plans down here at the bottom. And I do consulting for folks. Typically I'm wrapped up in a campaign. I don't really have a whole lot of time to consult with people, but I do that from time to time on individual bases, if that's the correct way to say it, on an individual basis. And the fundraising software is really simple. I'll give you a short 2 or 3 minute tour of this. And let's see. And I designed it because I was so frustrated at what was out there that everything was $300 to $700 a month. It was very complicated, very cumbersome. It was designed for federal races, for professionals like me. And every time I had a state or a local candidate, I couldn't seem to really get anywhere with them to get them to use it because it was so complicated. But here's the dashboard. You have your receipts, pledges, expenditures, tasks at the bottom. We'll start at the top. All your contacts are listed here with their name, email, phone number. You can go to quick menus to add a task, add a contribution, add a note, manage someone, delete. Right now this fundraising software is free to try. It'll probably be free all the way through the election season. We're kind of just going, letting people get in here and tell us what they think. It has all the information you'd need, notes, custom fields that can be imported, contributions and pledges, tasks, etc. You can add a task, simply add a contribution. It has all the different fields you would need, the different type of income sources you could name. You can add a note or edit a contact, and inside editing a contact you can add different groups and change the information that's here. The vendors work much the same way. These are folks that you pay money to. It's important to have this so that you can do your disclosures, and your contributions are listed here, and your receipts and your pledges. And if you need to export pledges to follow up via email in a mail merge or to send out mail merge documents, you can do that. Same thing with your contributions. Expenditures are much the same way. And then if you ever have a question, you can type it in here and click send, and somebody will get back to you. We'll go back to the dashboard and finish up here. You can add tasks here and delete them, change them, follow up with folks as you complete them. There are reports here. The coolest one I think that this program has is if you want to call folks, most state and local people know their folks by their first name. You can scroll through people and mark them for a call list. But then say, for example, if you've built a really good database over time and you're looking for folks that have given $1,000 to $10,000 who are in, let's say, the state of Kentucky, who had given in Kenton and Boone counties, and you searched, you found 6 folks there. You add those people to a pick list, and then you can either export the selection into Excel. We can go ahead and do that real quick. And all your information will come up here. You can see it has all the fields you could ever possibly want, and some maybe you don't. I figured it'd be better to give people more than what they need than not enough. Minimize that, but better yet, you could print a call list and download that into a PDF, so that if you're in the car or if you're traveling and you just need to make a few phone calls, you can print them out and do it the old-fashioned way. I apologize, this is a new computer, so it's showing some things that typically don't show up. And here you can see all the information that would be displayed. You can make notes down here. It'd be everything somebody would need to know. And then lastly, there are some other features here like adding contact groups. You just add a group. It's real simple. You can change your election periods, contribution sources, lets you know where the money was raised, so you know how events did or mailings did, so you can reference them later. And then the last thing I'll show you is, it's really easy to import contacts through this simple feature. We have a downloadable Excel spreadsheet. You just type it in, choose the file, it matches up the field, and imports them inside. So it's real easy to get your contacts in and out of this system. So those are some tools that are free for you to try, and some that are just completely free to use. So we'll get back to the presentation and finish this thing up briefly. We're going to be ahead of schedule, and then what I'd like you to do is, if you've got yourself muted, to go ahead and unmute. That's not right. To go ahead and unmute yourself and ask any questions that you might have. And one of the last big downfalls is call reluctance. People feel like that death will ensue if they call or visit to ask somebody for money. I always tell people, if you will open up the obituaries of your local paper, what you will find is that people die of heart attacks, stroke, car accidents, they slip and fall in the bathtub, cancer, but no one ever dies. You will never see, Shannon Sorrell died asking someone for money, just killed over. It doesn't happen. People don't die of asking for money, so just get over that fear. You will be fine. If they say no, if they say yes, you'll be better. If they say maybe, call them again. Procrastination. It's not a very fun task, so people put it off to the end. And it's, of all the things you can do on a campaign, fundraising is not one you can do at the end. You could put out your yard signs and scurry around at the last minute, maybe even get phone calls done, but you can't. You just can't raise money at the end. And if the earlier you start, the more donors you will capture and touch. The more you visit with those people and communicate with those people, the more, on average, you will raise from each person. So if you start early and if you have more donors, and of those donors you have larger average contributions, you are going to raise more money than your competition. So start early. Start early. And what if you win? If you win on election night, do not forget to dance with the ones that brought you. So often I watch campaigns do an awful, terrible thing, and they will just treat donors like an ATM machine, and they never talk to them again until it's election time. People don't appreciate that in any capacity. So reach out to those people and really help them. I guess know that you appreciate them, and if somebody's giving you $10,000, give them $10,000 worth of attention. If somebody's giving you $50, give them $50 worth of attention. That doesn't mean you visit with every person that donates, but it does mean that you reach out to them either in mass marketing or in personal contact, and the amount of money they give will tell you kind of what you need to do. At this point, I'm going to take questions about candidate fundraising. So if you're out there and if you've written down any questions, if you have anything, no question is too small or too, there are no dumb questions on the webinar. So if you have any, feel free to unmute yourself. It's quiet as can be out there, and go ahead and ask them. Anybody have any questions? Now's the time. Most people pay for this time. If you feel like asking, go ahead. Kevin.
I got a quick question. Most of your ideas are pretty good, and I do like it. I'm making notes, but unlike some of the areas, I'm in Southwest Florida, which is a little bit different, and Henry County, which is different than, what we say, Lee County or Palm Beach or Broward, as you know, which is a lot more densely populated. How would you say, and what would you say, if you had to zero down a few items that you wanted or a must-do for such a small county that requires so much one-on-one attention? I won't lie to you, I feel like I can have $1 million, which in my campaign and all my books, but it's not going to make a touch because every single one of them wants you to walk up. They want your attention. They want your time.
You're going to have to visit with those people. There's no way of getting around it. The best thing you can do is facilitate your time in such a way that it's efficient as absolutely possible. You can't change what people want, so you just have to either decide that you're not going to give it to them or give it to them when it comes to raising money. I will say this, I worked on a congressional campaign this last cycle where we were in one of the most rural districts in all of America, and we still raised money, and we still did well. We did have to go out of the district in some areas to collect what we needed, but we did well, and we ended up beating up an incumbent by the second largest margin in the nation against someone who had against an incumbent. So it can be done, but what you have to be careful of is people will tell you, oh, it's just a poor district. Oh, it's just tough out there. There's too many people running. The economy's bad. Well, the economy's always bad. People are always running, and it's always tough. And so all you can do, it's just like if it's raining outside, you can't control the rain. All you can do is take an umbrella and go about your daily business. So think about your environment in the same way. And the last thing I'll say on that is when we ran out of that rural district, the county that we ran out of as our home county was a very poor county. And typically folks did not raise money out of that county. But when a candidate is in a county, that campaign or that county typically produces 3, 4, 5, 10-fold of what it's ever produced in any other election. So that tells you that it's not that poor counties can't produce. It's just that you have to leverage your relationships to make them produce. I hope I answered your question right.
Yes, you did. I understand.
Okay. So, suck it up, Kevin. You just got to do it.
Okay.
Sorry, I mean, that's what I always have to tell every candidate. You just got to, you can't handle your external situations. All you can manage on campaign is what you do. So if you'll manage that well, you're not running against yourself. You're running against somebody else. So if you manage that better than the other person, then you're in good shape. Other questions out there, or Kevin, you can ask another one. Whoever wants to ask one. Anybody out there? The last thing I'm going to show you real quick here on the website is when you get a chance, if you'll go here and apologize, my internet connection must be running slow here. If you'll just click on this video here, it'll give you an overview of everything's on the site. There are lots of other videos. That's my ugly mug on there. So if you'll just click on it and watch it, you can kind of get an idea. And if any of you need any help offline and you want to shoot me an email, or if you have any questions, some people prefer email. They get embarrassed, or they don't want people to know, hey, that I'm running or whatever, or you're thinking about running. Shoot me an email and I'd be happy to answer the questions for you. But if there aren't any other questions, I'll go ahead and conclude the email. Is there anything else anybody else would like to ask? All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for your time. Good luck, and if I can ever help you in any way, please, by all means, let me know. Good luck and good campaigning out there.